Hey everybody, this is John Slick Baum with Slick Baum Air Shows LLC and Aviation Oil Outlet. Had a lot of questions about this airplane, the Extra 300L, so I figured we'd go ahead and do a walk around. Hey, thanks for all the messages and questions regarding this beautiful Extra 300L. It was built in 2006, and it is not an experimental, so we had a lot of questions about that as well. It's a normal category airplane, which is super cool. It just goes through its normal annual inspection. Obviously we take care of any squawks that it have, and then we fly it for the year. So the caveat is, of course, I would be following the POH if I was doing a real walk around as a pre-flight, but what I want to do is just go around the airplane, point out a few interesting tidbits, and kind of go through a walk around that I would if I was flying the airplane again. I'm not going to go flying today, so if I miss a step, for all of you folks that fly the Extra, you don't need to point out any mistakes there. Alright, so the Extra 300L, what makes this airplane so cool? Well, of course, 300 horsepower. The fact that it's only 1,500 pounds, and that it has plus and minus 10G airframe capability. And so we'll talk about all those things as we do this walk around. So of course, the normal thing that I always do is take a look inside the cockpit. So really cool engineering here. So how do you get into the cockpit? Squeeze the handles together and lift up on the bubble canopy. Of course, I want to make sure that the mags and the power and everything are off. Other things, you know, I always take a look at is my G meter from the last flight where Pat Ginsel and I got 8 Gs on his first Extra flight, so that was super cool that he was able to do that. So we're going to come back to the cockpit afterwards, but of course, just from a safety standpoint, I want to take a look at those things. So, of course, the bubble canopy is super cool. The visibility is just completely unbelievable. If you don't have somebody in front of you, I mean, it is that 180 degree from left to right, and then of course 360 all around you. And the cool thing about the wing of the Extra 300 is just check out how big this aileron is. I mean, you talk about roll authority, this is all control surface right here. So 400 degrees per second is the roll rate of the Extra 300L, and if you go ahead and put that stick, you know, full left or full right, it's definitely going to spin you around. So carbon fiber is what the aircraft is primarily made of. It is a tubular steel frame covered in carbon fiber, and that's what gives the airplane the rigidity for it to be able to pull at plus or minus 10 Gs. I started flying the Extra 300. Actually, I started in a 330 in 2010 with a group out of Las Vegas, and went through a ton of spin training that really augmented the military training that I had coming off of the Air Force Thunderbirds. I think that this airplane, that it has symmetric wing, it's just so stable, and it really gives you almost overconfidence because it is so stable. But from a normal spin type of sign-off that you would need for like your CFI if you're going after instructor rating, this is a great airplane to do that, and again, almost too forgiving. But also the inverted spins are really, really neat. I know a lot of people probably haven't had the opportunity to do that, but with the bubble canopy, it is an incredible airplane to do inverted spin training in as well. A lot of other questions that we get is, you know, hey Slick, you got some, you know, some FOD on your airplane. This is actually intentional to have this piece of string there, and then you go, well, what's it tied to? So let's talk about the Aerobatic sight gauge. So first of all, this sight gauge is used by me in the cockpit. So when I'm sitting in there and I look out at the wingtip, I can tell if I have, if I'm going straight up doing like some torque rolls or something like that, or in for a hammerhead. I can see that I'm 90 degrees off the horizon. I also have 45 degree lines, so if I'm 45 degrees of the horizon or all the way inverted at 135 degrees, I can tell where I am in relation to the horizon. And so then tied off of that is the string. So where this is important, if you're doing things like tail slide or torque rolls, to know that you're actually going to go backwards in the airstream. So if you start coming down, going backwards, like through your smoke or through your flight path, you'll see that that this string will actually turn the opposite direction. Something obviously that you have to be careful of walking around the Aerobatic sight gauge. This airplane, we did put a couple GoPro mounts. It does have your normal lighting, and it also does have tie-down points, although I do try not to keep it stored outside. Other things, just you know, I always take a look at the overall condition of the airplane, and then of course really checking the pitot-static system. The airplane is rated to 220 knots, so especially here in Pennsylvania when it's nice and cool out in the wintertime, you absolutely can easily achieve, you know, just straight and level 200, 210 knots with the AEIO-5400 300 horsepower engine that the airplane has. So obviously want to make sure I'm getting good airspeed reading out of that. People always ask, you know, what is underneath the aileron? So this is a spade for those that have not flown an airplane that needs to have some additional balance. Really what this helps with is the stick forces, because there's so much control surface out in the airstream, especially when you're going faster. If you try to get roll or a faster roll rate or aileron deflection, the stick can feel really heavy, and what this does is help balance out those stick forces. And you know, this is one of those things that you tweak. It has to be part of the rigging during your annual inspection, and just through flying it, you know, it's almost like personal preference. And you know, my friend Patty Wagstaff said that it's like black magic how these things work, but really it's for the feel designated for the pilot and just to keep the airplane balanced there. So the Extra does have wet wings, so there's fuel in each wingtip, or each wing. That when I'm doing full aerobatics, I obviously make sure per the manual that the wings are empty, but it does have a fill port on each side. And then of course with your handy dandy tool, you come down here and take a look at the overall condition of the wing, look at the spades, and then as we get down towards the center of the airplane, you can see that it'll come down to a fuel drain right over here. So pretty standard, making sure that there's no water in the fuel would be one of the things that I would check. So after I check that, of course, I want to check out the landing gear. A solid piece of carbon fiber is the primary makeup of the landing gear system, and it's really springy. In this airplane, if you do a hard wheel landing, you can actually spread out the gear and have a prop strike. So that's not very good, as you can imagine. But overall, just checking the condition of the landing gear, the wheel pants, tire pressure, and just making sure that the wheel brakes look good and it's not leaking any fluid. From there, obviously, again, just checking overall condition. But this is where I hopped into taking a look at the oil. So my good friends at Aviation Oil Outlet keep me topped off here. So pretty standard on a Lycoming 540 engine to have your normal dipstick and check the oil. So a pretty Mondo 3-bladed prop, constant speed prop, so you can imagine this airplane gets a really good bite with 300 horsepower underneath it. Typically when I fly in you know, just doing basic aerobatics, I'll fly 25 squared just to keep some of the pressure off the airplane. If I'm doing any you know, full unlimited aerobatics, I will go ahead and push everything forward and get all the juice I can out of the airplane. But you know, just like any other airplane, you just want to check the overall condition of the prop and just check that your air inlets are clean and that you don't have any issues as far as any birds deciding to make a home in your engine bay overnight. So I did mention on the other side there is a fuel filler for the right wing, and you can also check that. And then there is on top of the airplane a center aerobatic tank. So as I mentioned, you do have some aerobatic limitations with fuel in the wings, so I keep those dry other than cross countries, and primarily obviously fly off of the acro tank, which has an inverted capability to keep the engine running. And that fuel filler is up on top. And then if you check out right here is where we check the integrity of the fuel in that tank. It does have a stall warning indicator that's electronic. I think it's pretty standard for most pilots that are flying aerobatics to pull the circuit breaker there because you know that you're going to be stalling the wing quite often. You get that kind of annoying buzz in your ear. Again, technique only when you're flying an approved aerobatic airspace. One thing that I always stress about the Extra, and I talked about how cool the canopy is, but you realize that unfortunately, if something were to go wrong, the canopy is designed to come off. So it's held just by about a 1.25 inch pin here. So as you open the canopy, if you were in flight, just barely pushing forward on it, the wind is going to take that away so that you could get out of the airplane. I always keep the canopy closed unless I'm getting in or out of the airplane. I never leave it open that somebody could actually bump into it, or if a wind gust picks up, you know, it could pop it off the airplane and land on the ground, which would be a very expensive mistake. So if you're not a tail dragger pilot, you definitely have to figure the tail dragger game out first, and then flying this airplane. It does have a big engine, so it's kind of hard to see around the front, so I won't get bogged down in talking about tail dragger specifics, but this is a tail dragger airplane. Technique only on, you know, it's recommended to 3-point land. Most people 3-point land depending on visibility. I like to wheel land this airplane. I think it just has to do with my fighter background. I tend to carry a little extra speed on final, and I just find it to be a lot more comfortable where I can control the airplane. All right, so we talked about the ailerons and the capabilities of the control surface. If you look at the elevator here, I mean, it is 100% the entire control surface. Very free, clear movement of this elevator, and that's where you can pull back on the stick and get that plus, or you can push on the stick and get the minus 10G capability out of the extra. It does have a trim tab, probably a subject for another video, but I do fly with a little bit of nose down trim, especially when I fly formation, just to help reduce some of the pilot oscillations. And then also taking a look here at the rudder. Most airplanes just don't have this much control authority, and this is what allows the extra to just snap roll so well and really have controllability by using gyroscopics of the engine, getting the airplane into a pretty aggressive movement and then stopping it with precision. I believe the rudder is really what makes this airplane so special. Coming down to the tail wheel is this tube here. So this is the vent for the inverted oil tank. So I mentioned before, if I do a lot of inverted flying, definitely have a lot of excess oil that will leak out, and that's where my friends at Aviation Oil Outlet hooked me up with keeping me topped off with my engine oil. Coming around, checking out the rest of the airplane, and then getting into the cockpit. You know, I was fortunate to fly the F-16 in the Air Force and have great equipment, and in the civilian world, you know, you kind of transition to having you know, your baseline level of headsets and things like that. I do have to give a shout out to Lift, because my Core 1 helmet really made a huge difference this season through training and getting out and doing a bunch of flying this year. I did the Bose package, so the noise canceling is great with how loud this engine is. And just having that helmet, God forbid something were to go wrong. I was thinking, you know, I flew military airplanes for years and always wore a helmet, and now I'm flying an airplane that actually does more G than the F-16 at 10 Gs, and I'm not wearing a helmet. So really love that piece of equipment. Has really made a difference. And then you'll see as I climb in, I also am sporting Lift's aviation shoes. They've been really helpful as well. Hopping into the extra, you know, one of the really cool things is just the amount of rudder authority that you have. And one thing that's really neat that a lot of people don't know is it has electric rudder pedal adjustments individually. So just by pressing on the switches, there are motors that'll pull the rudder pedals inside and out. If you got one leg longer than the other, you can actually have that tweaked for you. There is a ton of P factor with this airplane, so as soon as you push the power forward with that 300 horsepower engine, man, you are ripping down the runway, so you do need a lot of right rudder to keep yourself straight. Other than that, it's a pretty basic cockpit. You know, your basic control instruments that you're really looking at when you do come inside and look at the airplane when you're flying is your airspeed indicator and your altimeter. So being an Extra 300L, there are two cockpits, so you do have the ability to have a passenger in the front seat. They also have those two primary gauges, the airspeed and altimeter as well, and they have a great view. They're, you know, feels to me like you're sitting exactly on the center point of the X, Y, and Z axis of the Extra when you're sitting in the front seat. So if you do have the tendency to get airsick, I think it might come out a little easier in the Extra, just because you're like, it's like sitting on a one-legged bar stool. As far as avionics, this airplane is rated as a day VFR airplane, but it does have a Garmin 530 which is a great piece of equipment just for navigating, getting from show site to show site. All right, folks, thanks for spending time doing a walk around of the Extra 300L. It's been a blast to talk about an airplane that I really love to fly. Thanks to Aviation Oil Outlet for shooting the video, and we'll see you out there.